Hello, and welcome to Secret Tree of Alchemy, episode number something. I'm going to post it online. I've lost track of these episodes. Today, in talking about the Secret Tree of Alchemy, I'll be focusing in on Tarot, and specifically the issue of divination and why. I only, for the most part, do divination for myself and not for other people. My experiences with that over the years. And how it seems to me these cards actually do work in providing value along divinatory lines, right? But there are issues with it that come up when you even toy with the idea of the common business scheme associated with divination, right? Which to me is a lot like drug cartel activity. You got drug cartels out of Mexico, for example, invading into the United States, right? And right now, fentanyl's a big issue because it's killing a lot of people in the United States. Okay, this is war, by the way, killing us, right? We've had a lot of different kinds of war working on us, including these high-profile mass killings that take place, designed to bring about gun control. So, there's a system to this invading cartel activity with the drugs, right? And it mirrors what has gone on in the past with Tarot culture coming out of South Central Asia via gypsy caravans heading north and northwest into northwestern Asia, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, the Middle East, that Europeans took a long time to try and discern as to the source of all of this. According to Crowley, anyway, in his book, The Thoth Tarot, or the Egyptian Tarot. And he doesn't delve into it deeply, he just kind of touches base with it. And also, that book is a read between the lines book that I'm starting to zero in on quite a bit of late, reading between the lines. So this morning I woke up with divination on my mind, so as a result of having read into this last night, I guess. But these Mexican cartels, as an example, right, they're central in all of this. Okay, they're a central influence. There are further reaching influences out of places like communist China, which is working to gain a foothold all through the Americas, right? Buying up land in the United States and South America, Central America, gaining political influence wherever possible, supposedly in the name of communism, but really in the name of building dependence amongst conquered populations, right? Like a hierarchy of dependence. So in this, they have, just like Iran has proxies in the Middle East, the cartels in Mexico have proxies in the form of MS-13 and other Venezuelan gangs. You could argue that Cuba is somehow involved in this on a similar level to that of Venezuela, but Venezuela seems to be the thing of late. Even though MS-13 was born in the United States, exported to Venezuela, Venezuela is now exporting one of its own gangs on top of MS-13 back into the United States. This new gang is all over the place, commandeering apartment buildings and what have you. I forget what its name is. It's forgettable compared with MS-13, which is an acronym. So, yeah, there's an obvious history associated with these acronyms like MS-13 that I won't get into here. But yeah, MS, that's like Pisces and Libra. Pisces alone, Libra. 13 is a collectivity, a collective unity, or a unit, as in military unit, in my view. But this whole drug thing is like a foot in the door for, establishing initial dependence, okay, and also initial business infrastructure in the invaded territory. These drug cartels are very quick about gaining other business infrastructures to add to their collection, right? Especially in regards farming, right? Again, they are substituting themselves for natural forms of providence, right? And we'll be getting into that and discussing Tarot in regards how active providence is substituted for people on a business scale. That's very similar to this, right? They're trying to put themselves in a position, these drug cartels, of providing on compulsory terms everything from food to drugs to prostitution of various kinds, including, sex trafficking of children and blah, 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 blah. Related to this, there is, of course, blackmail and compulsory involvement in criminal activities of various levels of organization, right? It's like a disease that spreads. In earlier points in history, Christianity was such a disease, introduced into a culture to loosen a cultural hold on active providence as an experience in life, right? It substitutes itself for it on compulsory terms, especially initially when people's heads are being chopped off over the issue, right? Sold out royal family types of influences, building armies and chopping heads off and imposing the invading religion, right? Destroying the older religion, which also underwent systematic corruption on its way of being destroyed, right? So tarot cards are kind of like this. It's relatively smaller scale, though. It's more of a survival tool for cultural invasion on a business scale, right? You caravan up into a region, and one of the little business things you do with your caravan is read tarot cards. They even put the archetype in the movie version of The Wizard of Oz, 1939, right? The wizard out there reading the crystal ball for the hapless girl that comes along who's all distraught, right? And he does a symbolic thing of stealing a photograph from the girl to symbolize vampirism to get his payment for his services. Because the girl obviously has nothing to offer. And the dog ate a hot dog or whatever, so it's all, relatively small business scale stuff, but it is a cultural foot in the door, right? That exploits the fact that Christian forces have already moved through a region and, for all intents and purposes, replaced natural culture with compulsory culture of some kind. And this tarot card divination as a business model kind of deepens that whole cultism, a little bit more towards destructive cultism, but without really going too far in that direction. Okay, this is really, tarot card readings traditionally or something are kind of semi-secret, but not really secret, right? And in order for me to gain insight into this mechanism, I had to have some of my own experiences reading tarot cards for other people over the 30 years that I've been reading tarot cards. Presently, I only read tarot cards for myself. Very occasionally for someone else. The last time I did it was for someone online who seemed to be totally up in the air over something. And I decided the question that was asked was safe to assist in providing a little clarity for, so that they could maybe calm down a little bit and be in a good position to evaluate things, including, the divination provided. Because in my experience, active providence, which works through divination, fully expects you to evaluate, all right? Just like your emotions like to be evaluated for information, so that information can be gleaned. Your emotions are a wonderful source of signal in life, right? So active providence works similarly to the way emotional signal works, in my view. Only it has a lot more to do with synchronicity, serendipity, that kind of a thing happening in your life, which might be real or might be fake. Okay, the sheriff's department might be providing for you serendipity and evaluating you, right? Dropping $10 bills on the ground or change on the ground for you to pick up, and then they drop a pill packet on the ground for you to try to pick up. They're playing dirty tricks, games similar to what the FBI does. They want you to pick up that pill packet. Or even, as soon as you encounter the pill packet, there's nothing you can do. They've got you on video. So picking up all these things off the ground or not picking them up and walking right by, and even if you walk right by, you're demonized just the same. Even though the situation catches you by surprise and you really can't do anything but become perplexed and simply walk on by, right? Like, what is going on here? Well, once you've walked by, they've got you on video walking right by that pill pack. So that's the kind of dirty tricks, that the dark emotions associated with dirty tricks are much a part of the divination business, in my view. Has to do with gossipy, getting together and talking rather darkly about family members and girlfriends and what have you, and trying to keep track of those people and somehow manipulate the situation in your favor, blah, blah, blah. And thankfully, I've never done any of those kinds of readings, but the few readings I've done for other people, the last time I did it, it just turns into kind of a semi-dark experience. I mean, it just happens because of the situation. And you have to kind of learn the hard way. Like, this guy really wants a girlfriend, and he's hoping this tarot card reading is going to provide that information for him, and then you don't see it happening, and then you relay the information, the guy's crushed. And you think to yourself, man, this is supposed to be a game according to the literature. We're just playing a game here, but that's not the way these people feel about it. They're dumping a lot of emotional energy into this situation, and it's turning dark. Emotional energy is a powerful influence. And this guy's just been emotionally crushed by a tarot card reading, right? And that was unexpected. So much for having fun and, trying to learn some, small lesson in life. This is how you build up an addiction when you're trying to put together a business infrastructure along these lines. And in my view, the business infrastructure can't help but work like that. Because, people ask whatever questions they want to ask, and very often these questions are delving into matters that are likely to turn dark for whatever reason. Gossipy dark, or even possibly murderously dark. Okay, we're talking about emotions here. And unfortunately, in my view, most people can't handle their own emotions worth a darn. Okay, they turn into organized criminals at the drop of a dime. It indicates third worldism taking over, in my view. It's happening in the 21st century in America, where even white people are like, unstable along these lines. People that used to rely on as proper middle class, healthy people. Well, their middle class status is in the process of vaporizing away, right? Through cultural invasions similar to what I'm describing right now. And it's all about building dependence. Okay. In life, there's a natural interdependence that tends to produce a middle class that is the majority. And that indicates freedom does reign. Okay. You're free. And you've got a socioeconomic balance built up that can last. Right? Some kind of middle class existence that people are, generally speaking, content with and socially, compatible with each other in naturally peaceful terms, naturally tempered terms that allow for genuinely effective social level thinking. Okay, this can take place. Compared with a more mechanistic groupthink, which seems to take over a mob. And I kind of think of these tarot card readings as a step in the direction of that kind of groupthink, mob think, right? And it's a business, so it's survival for one party involved in the situation who's going to manipulate the situation for maximum business value, right? And they'll answer virtually any question, right? And get into some dark, murky waters and take you along with them in the process. And they'll learn over time to feed off that energy and that emotion, and they'll teach you how to do the same thing as you all become vampires together over time. Okay, because the spirit world is not just light, it is shadowy, we'll say. I think the vast majority of what you would call spirit in the universes is good, but just as soon as relations are established, there is the seed of corruption there with it. It's through social interactions that corruption is very often introduced into what you would call a natural situation, right? Time alone, if it's optimally conducted, tends to be cleansing in comparison, right? You get away from these people for a while and just kind of reflect while you're by yourself and clarify things for yourself. And you realize, that group of people probably isn't a good idea for me to involve myself with in the future. I can try to find another group of people to be around that are more naturally attuned in life. They don't seem to be, swimming around in dark, murky shallows that are, getting kind of deep and dangerous here, so I'm going to back away, right? But alchemically speaking, right, it's the relations that are not only wonderful and good, but also contain the seed of corruption. It's just the natural balance of things. In fact, nature takes the seed of corruption and uses it for reproduction. Okay, and I'll leave that there. This kind of has to do with Aries, Taurus, Gemini to Cancer, right? Aries is somehow perfectly pure, but it's also no thing, right? There's no thing there. It's the singularity. And it's a concept. You can't experience anything of it. There's no requirement in nature that you think in terms of it, though you will be inclined to eventually arrive there, conceptually speaking, at some point, again and again and again. So people will develop ideas about that and trying to emulate it to their own advantage in life, often with supremely negative results, as though, emulating that aspect of what you think of as nature results in, you toying around with the concepts like pure dominance. Okay, Aries can be without being problematic at all, as long as it's completely separate from reality. But you try to bring Aries into reality through emulation, and you're darkening things and bringing things to stasis or shadowy existence, I guess you could say, murky existence of Capricorn scale. That's an aspect of nature that can be experienced through deadly orgone, for example, or other toxic presence in life, including out-of-body presence with its toxic component. That makes it potentially at least vampiric. There would be right conduct associated with going out of body, right? That would keep you from becoming, a practicing vampire. So, same goes with tarot cards. I can't see a way of ever engaging in business tarot simply because, you're letting people ask whatever questions they want. For the most part, just for business reasons. You're probably not turning down questions where, I'm not going to get into that area. And still there's the idea of people just becoming dependent upon you, which is too much. That becomes dark, right? You're part of the business infrastructure that reaches into organized crime, really, for all intents and purposes. So, interdependence is healthy when it's properly and healthily conducted without destroying natural individuality in a person, right? Excessive levels of dependence make you a quote-unquote child compared with whoever you are dependent upon. That's how compulsory destructive cultism works, especially when you get into the more destructive side of that dimension, right? That spectrum of cultism. There's healthy cultism, but that's largely not even discussed in our world today. You say the word cult and automatically negative connotations come up, even just when you talk about the cult of Barbie or whatever. The cult of Comic-Con. It's basically just business, right? And culture combined. But it reaches into the more natural forms of cultism where people are enthusiastic and they get together in that enthusiasm and they share information, right? This is what, in my view, Göbekli Tepe was originally all about. But I guess you could say, the seeds of corruption are contained within the relations that are established, right? If those seeds flourish, they can become something larger scale corrupt in the form of something organized crime, which seems to be dominating all religion on the planet today, in my view, because there's just too much about it that's compulsory, at the very least. Too destructive in people's lives and gaining control over people, making people dependent. And effectively in some way under your control, at least manipulative control. These manipulations become more and more Machiavellian over time, in the sense that you become more cunning and more skilled and less likely to go to jail compared with Joe Average psychopath, who is, calloused at a lower brow level compared with you, who are, seemingly becoming super intelligent. And your also calloused nature, right? That could be described as psychopathic to at least a degree, right? There's supposed to be, some aspects to the dark triad that differentiate them all out from each other, but they also share a lot in common. Narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism. And then, of course, you get into dark tetrad with sadism considered and mixed in there, and people differ in their views as to whether all these qualities really can be differentiated out that much. It goes back and forth, but in my view there's a pentad at work through what is referred to as the occult world, right? Where masochism is also an important part of this process, and in handing yourself over to a specialist, a business specialist in divination, you are positioning yourself masochistically without even realizing it, and they're positioning themselves, potentially at least, in conducting their business, at least on an initial seed of darkness level, as sadistically involved with you, taking advantage of you on that level, becoming calloused due to, business considerations. This tends to happen in like sales, for example, business of sales, where, you read the Bernays books on propaganda and public relations, and you become a keen salesman, right? You believe in what you're selling, man, and it's exclusive belief. Won't even look at that other product range that other guy's selling across the street. And by the way, don't sell my stuff to that guy. Just bring it back and sell it back to me so I can keep control over it. Kind of a deal. And, how dark and negative does that typically get? I don't think it gets as dark and negative as it gets with tarot. If you happen to be selling quality product at reasonable enough prices, right? You can keep yourself from getting dark, right? As a salesman or whatever. But if you're ripping people off, you're getting into dark waters, right? With divination, I honestly don't think you can help but get into what is termed black magic, even if you're looking at something like ancient Greek divination, right? The oracles or whatever of ancient times. It's because of this dependence thing. And sometimes, you might be running just as clean a show as you possibly can. Maybe this was done in ancient Greece, I don't know. But then this king comes along and he's going to chop your head off if you don't provide him a divination. Because this guy's clearly a nut. And he introduces the darkness into the situation and forces you to do divination while you're under the influence of toxic gases or whatever. And you die from it because it's the wrong time of the cycle, the lunar cycle or whatever, because it's the wrong concentration of toxic gas. And this idiot doesn't realize that because it's all semi-secret stuff, right? Divination. It's kind of done, in the shadows, on the outskirts of town, in the caravan van or whatever. And, it will turn dark, I think it's comparatively rare for people to get together and play divination games with each other without it turning dark, simply because somebody's going to try and become dependent on the situation. They're not going to trade divinations back and forth with the same knowledge that I've earned over the years, 30 years of doing divinations. I know it works for me, but I can't prove it to anyone else, and it's pointless to try. People need to be left to their own beliefs so they can sort their own beliefs out and their relationships with their beliefs, right? Belief is one of those ideas that in the Secret Tree of Alchemy is assigned to Capricorn, just the same as the Devil trump card. I'm of the opinion, at least initially, that belief is the devil. Okay, it is something to be managed and tempered in life. Belief is something to be engaged in, provided or provisionally or tentatively, in the interest of gaining real experience and knowledge somehow that would either confirm or disconfirm that belief. For the most part, some beliefs can be kept on the back burner for quite some time at a low intensity level, emotionally speaking, right? Until, you kind of prove or disprove them one way or another. But with compulsory destructive religion, belief becomes to degrees compulsory and a compulsion, right? You're constantly pushing a belief and a quote-unquote faith, which really amounts to nothing at all. Faith is another one of those things that tends to lean more in the direction of Aquarius over there, where it's a labor you're maintaining in the interest of something. But what? Well, if the cult takes it over and substitutes itself for your natural providence interface in life, your faith is in the institution and its quote-unquote gods, idols, whatever. That's where your faith is expected to lie, and you're expected to maintain it there, and also hand over typically at least 10% of your earnings in life, right? Tarot card readings as a business are kind of similar to that whole orientation, though it will step into darkness about at least as often as religion does. The business side of things, right? The best religion is that which is simply we come together to share together our commonly held knowledge base and socially interact and enjoy that process, and then we go back to our normal lives, right? Some compulsory religions have learned to emulate that pretty darn effectively. Christianity's moved in that direction, and you got to the point where you kind of have to reevaluate it as to whether or not it's becoming truly healthy religion despite everything, or it's more deceptive and insidious as an infiltrating influence that eventually gains militantly political control over people's lives, right? So, yeah. But Christianity has a legacy of militant infiltration and compulsory, forced involvement in the religion to the point where, heads are chopped off, that kind of a deal. Lots and lots is in thousands at a time. People's heads being chopped over the issue. Royal figures sold out to foreign powers and all that under the table. Largely even more secret than, something like tarot card reading. Also much darker, right? Because tarot culture is kind of a foot in the door on a business infrastructural scale, right? Basically, it's a little survival tool that has an initial negative influence on an invaded population. It's not of the same destructive scale as fentanyl addiction is in the United States right now. TV culture opened the door for that, in my view. It's just dumbed down culture. And really, Christian culture is the same way. It's dumbed down, especially Protestant culture. Do I have anything more to say on the subject of divination and tarot? To me, just like with anything you could call religious, to me it's a matter of experience that you provide yourself first and foremost, and then you share it with other people that are equally free to decide and experience for themselves. And you pretty much just share it. You don't try to get money out of it. That is like building upon the seeds of corruption that are already present in any social circumstance. Okay, social circumstances are wonderful by nature and need to happen on free terms, but the seed of corruption is typically there waiting to flourish. So I'll leave you there, and thank you for listening. At least one more issue here. This has to do with psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is one of those practices in life that can so easily become dark and negative. And you can gain an understanding just looking at this tarot reading divination business situation to where genuinely certified vetting on a practice level is so important to something like even psychotherapy, right? Psychoanalysis, whatever, simply because it can't be allowed to become corrupt. It cannot be allowed to flourish in a corrupt manner at all, to include on a business scale, to be a genuine therapy in life, right? And then there's the issue of the occult world as it might come to bear upon, psychoanalytic practice, for example, where that can so easily become vampirism that reaches back into the memories of your early childhood. Out-of-body vampirism, visiting upon you at night. You would never want one of these people to be one of your therapists. And I suspect, Freud's own practice may have been polluted by these practices, but Symbolism is one of those things that can be interpreted a number of ways, right? A bunch of collected up head statues in a clinical office could mean any number of things, but whenever I see something like that, I think vampirism is the first thing that comes to my mind simply because I know about it. So, yeah, in my experience with this tarot card divination thing, at least one online vampire, I think, managed to find me online on a web forum, and they reveal their presence semi-obvious terms. Okay, basically, they decide they don't like you because of the way you're talking about their business, because they are in the business of reading tarot cards. And they are vampires, and they are making money off of it, or at least initially making money off of it. And they don't like you messing with their business. So they find a way to visit on you. They find a way into your situation the way out-of-body vampires do. You're foolish enough, for example, to leave online photographs of where you live, for example, and they get a hold of one, and they use that as kind of like a way of getting into your situation on an out-of-body level. All right, however they do these things, meditation-wise, before they conk themselves out to go to sleep and go out of body. And they find you, and then they're a presence in your life, and they're a negative presence because they are vampires, but they also tend to reveal their specific presence just to play games with you, I guess. Like this one out-of-body vampire that I'm talking about would reveal herself in your present situation, working about the kitchen or whatever, by making you sneeze right when your hands are full at the countertop or whatever, with your clean dishes or whatever. And that was one of her calling cards. It's a her, as far as I can tell. You discern that from your online interactions taking place where, she might hop on your thread or somebody else's thread and just say crazy foo-foo stuff. They don't engage in conversation with you because they would lose mana or something if they lost in some kind of an exchange with you, because they're kind of negative about what you're saying, but they won't say what they really want to say because you'll be able to say something back, and they don't realize that, you don't argue about certain things, like, for example, the Secret Tree of Alchemy. I never argue about online. That's too much like, propaganda and promotion of stuff that people should be able to discern for themselves whether or not they think it has any value or not, the information you're providing. But I do argue about things like the World Trade Center terror event of 9/11, 2001. Simply because there are so many active disinformationists out there trying to muddy the waters on that subject and keep people from investigating, and to this day, they never get it right. They're pushing really bad ideas, incorrect ideas, just to keep people on their heels, investigatively speaking, right? And I'll get right into the mix on that to a degree. Try not to become too negative in the process, or too forceful, you might say. Just insistent upon truth. It's always the best policy, and showing evidence to the effect, which is ignored. And this vampire type person, because vampires are all over the internet, by the way, it's unwise to publish pictures of your domestic environment online because of it. And that was her calling card online, is basically a certain style of foo-foo, fa-fa, nonsense talk, crazy talk. I'm not going to say anything real because I don't want to actually, be revealed as a liar or anything. So, but the whole thing over Secret Tree of Alchemy, I never provide arguments over, trying to argue with people over the issue. It's like with divination itself. People discover it themselves, and then they balance it into their own personal lives however they want. They probably learn a lot of the same negative lessons I learned as soon as you try to interact with other people. There's no, it's difficult in this world to engage with other people on simply, gameplay terms, even. because they're conditioned to the business end of things, right? Just by seeing it on television, how the business is conducted, and how the issues that are brought up on television or in movies are so weighty and dark. And they kind of take on that same attitude, and it just wrecks everything up, and they're channeling too much negative emotion into it. They're asking the wrong questions, really, and you don't, at the time at least, know what questions they should be asking. So you have to learn that over the course of time, too. What are the best questions to ask? Your own questions that you need answers for in doing your own divination. That's my view. So, yeah, I suppose people can get together, as groups, spontaneously developed divination groups and share divination with each other. But just like with every other type of cultic activity, it can turn dramatic, can't it? And negative. And then, like with OTO examples I've seen, somebody shows up and just shuts the whole thing down. Just shut it all down. It's turned negative. It's corrupt. It's been corrupted, So there's that. And thank you for listening. Another issue that comes up. Okay. The spirit world. This is my view on the spirit worlds or dimensions, right? That some people refer to as the spirit world. It's functionally infinite in scope. Therefore, on a practical level, an infinitesimally small portion of that interdimensionality is compatible with your specific nature at all. Okay, that's how vast something like a spirit world or an interdimensionality would be. If you could somehow prove its existence, which in my view is largely out of reach, the very limits of our perception seem to coincide with the very limits of dimensional consideration, right? I.e. our dimension, our experience of our dimension, right? Even science has reached that far only to find itself perplexed as to, whether there is such a thing, for example, as the cosmic ether. And then they just dropped it. So, within that context, though, we'll just turn this whole infinitesimally small portion of the spirit realms that are compatible with human nature into a context. We'll turn that into a context now. This is still a vast range of ideation that can influence your life, affect your life, be experienced in your life, maybe. Okay. It's just a huge array of what Freud would term psychical, elements. Okay. Now, you use a term like element, you're thinking in terms of something that can't be broken down any further, typically, but there's a more casual use of that term that just basically means objects. Objectivity being kind of a relational consideration relative to that consideration, right? And objectivity can be corrupted. The seeds of corruption are automatically there. That's where you get into the whole consideration of absolution versus, your own efforts at resolution of, issues, right? Which I've discussed in other videos to a degree. But nature reveals active providence through something like absolution taking place in your life spontaneously, naturally, and in response usually to your own efforts at resolving some kind of an issue or a problem. And it takes a certain kind of form where, the equivalent of a book, becomes available to you as you wake up in the morning, you might say. This whole range of ideas become available to you. So if you can practice that, you're developing interface with this spiritual interdimensionality, which is just hugely infinite in scope. It's functional scope. Okay, and it involves, what Freudians would term object relations. In fact, the mind works largely on an object relational level. But, the alchemical Secret Tree of Alchemy reveals eventually to people who study for long enough. That's what makes it so interesting as a study, because it keeps revealing information that turns out to be correct. But, you can extrapolate into the whole idea that as the object relations are established in Gemini, the seeds of corruption are already there. The innocence that is Taurus, for example, as a spark of creation, is there for an instant and then it's gone. And it's gone as soon as the relations that specify the spark of creation into something specific. As soon as those relations take place, there is corruption that establishes mortality. Okay? You're a mortal being at that point of some kind. You might last 100 billion years or 15 years, who knows, depending on what kind of being you are, right? You're a mortal being, a finite scope being, compared with that which be in Aries, which is conceptually, you can approach the idea that it is infinite in scope. But making such an idea compulsory for people is utmost tyrannous, it turns out, because religions are doing this kind of thing all the time with their concepts of God, right? He be infinite and see all and know all. You best worship or die, and blah, 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 go to hell, and all that kind of stuff. It's very negative, compulsory, destructive cultism that does that. And these occultists associated with it know how to create dream worlds for people of hell scope, right? And then somehow find a way to try to confine souls there. So they essentially did something very similar to that with JSK, reincarnating from the life of JFK, putting him in a prison family from which he was kidnapped for 3 years. So to be part of the Manson family and the Zodiac Killer family and the Hollywood family, and then released back out of captivity. I'm beginning to find out there's a possibility it was a very traumatic experience traveling back to Maine from California. It boiled down to what the equivalent of a coin toss as to whether or not he was actually going to live or die in that situation. So, that's part of making people forget their past, right? Traumatizing them. But I've only seen indications so far. The movie The Bunny Game, it's such a horrible movie you can't sync it effectively because you just can't watch most of it, but it's just ongoing trauma. I'll leave it there. So, and seeing indications along these lines elsewhere is difficult. So you wind up with kind of a friendly take on this kidnapping situation. It's too friendly and nice sounding, and even alluring the way Hollywood makes movies alluring and what have you. And it just still wind up delusional just because the darkest aspects of it can't be effectively imagined and communicated for whatever reason. So getting back to the spirit interdimensionality, right? Yeah, I mean, people talk about, the third dimension, the fourth dimension, the fifth dimension, sometimes in terms of Einsteinian terms, we'll say. So I kind of sidestep all that and deal directly with what I term active providence, which is object relations at work all the time. Through synchronicity, you can experience with related serendipity being particularly sometimes a pointed expression thereof, or trying to sort out movie thinking, in regards to what is deliberate versus not deliberate and how those two things meld together. Because they seem to have the ability to sync a lot of media material together in response to, for example, me watching a movie sync. But at the same time, there's got to be something synchronistic going on here, having to do with nature and the way our dimension naturally programs situations relative to other situations through this object relational influence, right? That comes out of Gemini, which Gemini is an infinite functional scope, can't be experienced directly, but only really indirectly or through the emotions kind of a deal. Emotional signals seems to be in tune with it. Everyday synchronicity seems to be in tune with it if you can tune into that at all without losing realistic scope of perspective, right, on life, and in successfully avoiding becoming delusional over the issue. So developing intellectual strengths and resiliences prior to wading into this issue seems to be important. Maybe some of the more healthy cults that have ever existed divided themselves into inner and outer circle portions just based on that necessity, where the children just aren't strong enough yet to get the entire knowledge handed down to them. So, but that can be corrupted too, just like anything else. So, and now these days, inner circle and outer circle arranged cults, most of them are corrupt, destructive cult leaning, right? So it becomes a means of secrecy that is so easily weaponized and used to exploit people, to leverage people. That's why the issue of child exploitation is such a hot issue, because it corrupts the development of people so fundamentally into supporting organized crime. It's not even funny, and organized crime is so dark an influence on human society. It's militant, it's invasive, it's war conducted against populations. And I guess I'll kind of leave that there. I think I've explained usefully enough this whole idea of my take on the spirit realms, right? The vast majority of it simply isn't directly compatible with human nature or even the nature of our experienced reality. But a portion of it is, and then a portion of that portion you could label as the darker aspects of reality or the shadowy aspects. Thankfully, the darkest aspect is pure oblivion itself, which is somehow separate from our experienced reality. You might refer to it alchemically speaking as God's mercy. If you think of God in those specific terms, compared with, because I term those terms to be inactive providence terms, compared with active providence, which you could think of as God also, if, that's the way you want to think on the subject. But you could also call it goddess, which is what I'm inclined to do, simply because I have a polar orientation on the Secret Tree of Alchemy, where, if one thing's masculine, then the other thing's feminine, and then vice versa on down the line, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until you get to the bottom of the tree. But it doesn't have to be that way. Everything could be feminine if you wanted it to be, and you could play the game that way, or masculine if that's the way you want to play the game. But you can't, in my view, make it compulsory for anyone to think that way, to include your own children. Compulsory cultism is just so dangerous. It's stepping right into the same exact dark waters as obviously destructive cultism that we've been studying for several decades now in this country. So thank you for listening. Some more ideas here. The central idea useful in avoiding the development of a compulsory destructive cult is that of being together in freedom as the base intelligence presence in human society. If you think of Gemini as the ultimate practical expression of freedom, which is, vastly, most of it's beyond our reach anyway, but what is within our reach to experience tends to happen, it reveals itself through active providence in life, right? And if we're free to experience that on our own terms and then come together to share information on that level, that's religion. Okay, real religion. And, you share that knowledge in freedom. Now, within that context, there is the concept of authority, which is a genuinely legitimate authority. But natural authority is based on, knowledge value acquired, that people naturally tend to make use of rather than rely on, okay, excessively at least. This is a social interaction type thing that naturally finds organization within even the healthiest cult. But by authority along these lines, I'm not talking about compulsory authority by a long shot. In my view, genuine human religion is an endeavor that people engage in on free social terms. Okay, there is no room for compulsory authority in it, and compulsory dependence that develops out of such compulsory authority, where the knowledge base is then divided up into, secret versus public considerations that turn the whole cultic involvement dark, okay? In the sense of becoming an organized criminal syndicate of some kind or another. There's such a vast array of human knowledge available that some certain aspects of that knowledge base are going to be, the kind of knowledge that lends itself towards the development of what you would call religious cult phenomena or just gatherings, right? This is before you get into the whole concept of cultism per se, where cultism is more of it can be something that's been long defined on healthier terms, or it can become something that's been long compulsory under unhealthy terms, right? And cultism can take forms that turn very negative when you're dealing, for example, with puppet leaders around the globe that are dictators, as an example of, cultisms. So, yeah. Cultic behavior is natural for people, but it's only really healthy on free terms. People are free to come together and then leave the situation. Authority associated with the situation is based upon merit that reveals itself in free social terms, and that's it. It's not in any way compulsory, where you're required to bend a knee before a compulsory authority. As soon as you have anything like that going on in religion, it's turning compulsory destructive. Yet another issue. This issue with 9/11 is such an interesting example along these lines of discussion, right? It has to do with very large groups of people falling on their face in the face of a really negative situation. I hate to speak in these terms relative to this situation because a lot of people died on that day, right? 9/11, 2001 in New York and Washington, D.C. So, but the aftermath of that situation that developed on an information sharing level was just such a complete disaster of huge cultic proportions. And as soon as you introduce the word cult in the situation, it's like you're being sacrilegious or something, right? But anything that draws people together on such a massive scale as a central focus, where events took place and ideas have been associated with those events, it's drawing upon cultic power, okay? People have cultic power, the ability to come together in maybe enthusiasm or maybe rage, okay? Or depression, sadness, anxiety, anything emotional, all right? Right away, you've got a cultic situation developing. Now, it can turn positive and flourish that way, or it can turn negative, and somehow the initial seeds of corruption that are automatically part of the situation just flourish and develop into something hugely dark. And in this sense, in my view, this huge darkness was communistic in scale because a lot of disinformationists came out of an underground to express themselves relative to this situation. And this includes, popular media, radio shows, online platforms, platform-based shows, podcasts, whatever. They all got in on the disinformation train and dominated the whole discussion scene of this issue for a quarter century now. It's calmed down, since the beginning of this recent decade, but prior to that, it was a pretty hot issue. And if you were arguing for the genuine truth of the situation, you were a very severe minority in the situation. Okay, a lot of argument went back and forth. I even got involved in the argumentative aspects of it. You can maybe surmise that maybe it wasn't such a good idea on my part, but, I'm still human. There's some areas that I'll just dive right into argumentatively, rather heated fashion. This is one of them. There is evidence to indicate clearly, this is just one example within that context, clearly what happened with Building 7. This evidence is ignored across the board by most people. Some people clue into it, but, these are probably healthier-minded people than me who basically temper themselves and don't say much. So I felt like I was the only person talking on this subject for the longest time. For the longest time, I was kind of vaguely aware of the whole issue myself. Even though I saw the video, I somehow didn't see it right the first time, right? Because I tell you what, steel coming out of the nearest tower to Building 7 slammed through Building 7 like a knife through butter. Real straight, real neat right down the side of the building. Coming to rest on the inside of that building. I just know that's the case based on the video evidence I looked at that showed. There's a very brief video clip that shows through the smoke, clearing a little bit, that huge gash right down the side of Building 7, closest to the collapsed towers, where all the smoke was coming out. Right underneath the penthouse on top of that building, it goes down right down the side of that building. So neat. The first time I saw that video, I mistook it for the corner of the building rather than seeing it as a huge gash. It almost looks like two buildings side by side. Confusion is like a seed of corruption that's always on your mind, right? In my mind, anyway. And you got to clear that all out, clear your head to be able to see through that smoke clearly, right? Which I did eventually. and started arguing correctly on the subject, more surely in the right direction. But clearly the video evidence exists, and clearly the video evidence is ignored and probably eventually disappear from YouTube. It is on YouTube right now. I did reacquire the site, the channel on YouTube. And I've, mirrored the video on BitChute to make sure the video gets out, because it's a good video. It's not perfect, but it's good. It's clearly somebody skilled but amateur that made the video and went through the trouble of highlighting important points, showing unedited clips of the collapse of Building 7 versus edited clips. The edited clips being so popular for some strange reason, right? They show the penthouse collapsing into the interior structure of Building 7 prior to the overall structure coming down. Okay, there are no detonation explosions associated with that process. If you've ever seen videos of detonating buildings, you would know the difference. The sounds, the sights, right? No, it's breaking infrastructure, breaking structure, steel structure inside the building that's taking place and causing, panels on the outside of the building to fall from the side of the building prior to its overall collapse. It's almost systematic, but it's chaotic. It's clearly potential energy becoming kinetic energy as steel breaks from stresses, okay? Caused not only by this initial structural damage to Building 7, but the fire that burned on all through the afternoon, right? All morning, the rest of that morning, all into the afternoon and the late afternoon, finally the collapse takes place. So the fire did contribute to the collapse in my view. I saw no indications of planted explosive demolition devices going off. Even though some online, podcast platforms insist they see explosions. No, there are no explosions. The building is collapsing. That's the physics of a building collapsing. Okay, thankfully I have a sense for physics, even if I'm not, you might think of me as a lazy physicist, okay, along those lines. But I'm good that way. So, apparently a lot of people just have no sense of physics. That's TV generational influence right there. Dumbing people down ahead of time. To the point where when something like 9/11 happens, they just can't respond properly. It's the people that are failing in the face of this. Okay, it's just not a bunch of victims being taken advantage of by elites. Hapless, innocent victims, okay? There are lots and lots of people in this situation who are far from innocent, arguing ridiculous points. Everything from energy weapons from outer space to nuclear explosions going off. And drone piloted jets, which is an outside chance possibility, but not likely, right? Now, drones is more plausible than nukes, in my view, right? But still, from all appearances on video and recordings, it was terrorists stealing jet airliners to crash them into buildings, okay? That's the way I would run things if I were a nefarious intelligence network precipitating terror events. But to find evidence under those situations of under those circumstances of conspiracy is way difficult, and people cannot get to that evidence if they're constantly on their heels, caught up in ridiculous arguments over pseudo evidence that does not, people become dependent upon it to think in terms of conspiracy in lieu of finding real evidence of conspiracy. They latch on to things like, a passport showing up in a pile of rubble as though that's evidence of conspiracy clear. What is the likelihood of that happening? Well, there is a clear, natural likelihood of it happening as a result of, somebody's passport flying out of a jet as it explodes upon impact with buildings. Sure, the jets went into the interiors of the buildings, did structural steel damage to the buildings, along with starting massive and very hot fires, right? That brought down the Twin Towers. Twin Towers also happen to be novel skyscraper designs that also happen to be vulnerable to just exactly such a thing taking place, as any trained fireman can tell you, The structure of those buildings is just completely different from your average skyscraper. There are no other buildings on Earth like them, and probably never will be again, exactly like them. But also, the steel that fell out of the towers into Building 7, it was just massive chunks of superheated steel, large enough to crash right through Building 7, right through the side of the building, almost precision, like a precision cut right down through into the interior of the building, coming to rest on the lower floors of the building and starting massive fires down low in the building. That explains why all those fires were so low in the building. Superheated steel just laying there in the interior of the building, starting fires. The fires start to reach up in the building. The heat builds up in the building. It influences the damaged steel inside the building, and then the damaged steel collapses. If you look at all of the evidence, most sensible people will come to those same conclusions that I've come to. But most people, for some strange reason, do not look at all of the evidence. And the same problem happened with the JFK assassination. Most of what I, rather blatantly have called boneheaded theories in the past are based upon not looking at all the available evidence, all of it. Now, I haven't looked at every last scrap of it because I've, just like most people, casually delved into investigating these matters. But when I encounter evidence, I bloody well remember it to a minimal useful degree. You might call it to a lazy degree even, where I don't even want to know her stupid name, but I know she was associated with David Ferrie in the summer leading up to the assassination. So what were they doing together in David Ferrie's kitchen that was so scientific, quote unquote? Because I'll tell you right now, the idea that he was doing cancer research is utter and complete and obvious BS designed to mark a situation as significant otherwise. I've come to my own conclusions that even the cancer research theory is symbolic of something else, namely refilling bullets, where you've taken the lead out of the bullets or drilled it out, leaving, a thin copper shell of a bullet that you then use electrolysis to fill with magnesium, right? Why? Because it had to be done. Because JFK is smart as an individual. He knows he can ride relatively safely in that open-top limo as long as he's packed in there with a lot of other people, right? Together with the people of America, right? We are together with the people. If we die in this limousine, several of us are going to die together because of the will of the people just wasn't up to the task of maintaining human freedom, right? And after that, those events, again, people fell on their faces on a massive scale. They just don't get it. They don't get it. They don't get it. They don't get it. They don't get it. And they get led around by magic bullet theories that are themselves symbolic, in my view, of magnesium. But I won't delve too far into that because I've discussed it, or I will be discussing it shortly on my Hollywood Review videos, episode number 60 coming up. But yeah, I have my own theory, but I know it's not a boneheaded theory because it accounts for, in my view at least, all of the evidence that you can encounter. Here's the thing though with evidence, some of it is fake that you're likely to run into. Chances are maybe I've run into fake evidence too and just bought it. Despite my best efforts to process disinformation for the really good information, I might have fallen on my face. Who knows? Somebody might be able to illustrate to me why that would be the case, but yeah. Magic bullet is really magnesium bullet, so that it will explode inside the skull, and at most you'll get the odd copper shard coming out the other end to injure somebody, but not necessarily kill them, compared with a big heavy bullet traveling at supersonic speeds through JFK and through somebody like Governor Connolly. Yeah. At that range, 80 yards as a maximum range, that bullet was definitely supersonic, and it would have been the case even with a normal bullet. Supersonic, pretty heavy bullet, relatively speaking, for, such a small caliber bullet. It's a rather blunt-nosed thing, which makes it useful, for drilling into, through the nose of the bullet, making essentially a magnesium-filled hollow point out of the thing, or something similar to that. Some kind of slug that explodes once it's in the body. It releases so much energy, right, that the head explodes and then rocket propels the body back into the left, right? Kind of back down into the left. Things exploding out of the top of the skull. Leaving, as far as I can see, the back of the limo clean. I got to look at the video again, but I'm relying maybe just a little bit too much on information presented in the movie JFK by Oliver Stone, where it is clearly illustrated prior to JFK being propelled back into the left, there was a propulsion forward from the rear, right? Then the head just instantaneously explodes right out the top. Bang. You don't even see anything come out the front or any exit wound anywhere taking place. It's really bizarre what went on with this. It's a very lightweight, high-velocity bullet that just as soon as you fire that bullet, the magnesium is going to turn right into a powder that the bullet carries along its path. It probably, can't even be accurate beyond like 150 or 200 yards because of the nature of the bullet. But at that range, it is accurate and lethal. That rifle that was used is out of the factory accurate, tested at the factory to be accurate. So in my view, they didn't even use the rifle scope installed on the thing. That was installed on there for symbolic reasons, made in Japan, and of inadequate quality, which, back in that day, I guess Japan cranked out a lot of those kind of products. Same as China, did for the longest time. Poor quality plastics, that kind of stuff. So the scope is just there for symbolic reasons. PT-109 being taken out by a tasked submarine of double hull proportions, tasked for specifically hunting PT-109 down behind enemy lines. Well, while it was behind enemy lines, conducting scout, assault type operations involving 7th Cavalry troops and naval intelligence personnel. So, yeah, I'll kind of leave that there. The people are caught up in compulsory destructive cultism as an overall civilized paradigm, largely defined by what I call Abrahamism as the umbrella cult that protects and manipulates into ongoing function, all of the Abrahamic subcults of Christianity, Judaism, Muslim religion, communism, Catholicism, as it's being turned into a dead culture to be made to disappear. Yeah, you got the death cult of Christianity, Catholicism, as it's literally to die out as far as the public is concerned anyway. And the slave cult of Protestantism, and they're all caught up together in just compulsory, destructive, cultic negativity, and even warfare, holy war and what have you, of really negative scope, dark scope, supremely dark, shadowy scope, right, that you would associate with the fog of war and all the Machiavellianism that goes along with that, and manipulating political circumstances and what have you. So I'll leave that there, and hopefully I won't have any more ideas run across my mind that are so important, right?